So John, Paul, Howard, appreciate the information. Obviously, it was more on the technical side, but that kind of moved right into the applicability of it and the dangers. And I think we all can relate to that. So I'm going to move to Q&A right now. And I put it in the chat and I mentioned it up front. If you have a question, a couple ways to ask it. If you click on participants, you can see that in the Zoom probably bar at the bottom of your screen, participants. And then you can click on raise hand. I'll just click on your hand and give you the floor for you to ask the question. If you prefer, you can click on the chat feature, and that's another way you can. So I'm going to start out with Craig Stevens. I'm going to unmute your line, and all you have to do is accept that and then ask your question.
Hey, thanks, guys. It was less of a question, more of a thank you. I just learned more about this than in this short period of time by you guys than we would ever learn from the people trying to put this in. As you know, I don't know if you know me from the previous call, but my house is just down below Binghamton and Vestal. I'm 8 miles from the New York state line, 188 years on the same corner. Not interested in when the wind's blowing that direction and having this rain down on us, of course. But I will tell you, I was just on a call Tuesday night with Rob Bilott. You know who that is? He made the Dark Waters film. He's a PFAS and PFOS legal expert. And he has no idea that this is happening, so I will definitely let him know that there's a potential for PFAS, and PFOS on this. He got the Big Fish Award by the River Keepers that they give it every year to somebody that's made a huge difference. So Mark Ruffalo's a good friend of his. Maybe I'll have them both come down and check out what they're trying to put in your neighborhood. It's very interesting to watch. I think I said before, but I will restate it to everyone that's watching this and watches it on the recording. The oil and gas industry came in and dumped 55 huge compressor stations in our backyards in Susquehanna County alone. Some of them have 14 gas-fired compressor engines in them. When we asked them what the vapors are coming out, they said, what? Drum roll, please, water vapor. That is the standard pat answer of any company telling you what's going to be coming out. So I said, great. I actually had the guy that was the head geologist that started fracking in Pennsylvania from Penn State. And I said, great, let's get a big ladder. You can put your face over that. We'll put a towel over your head. It'll be great, just like breathing steam over a pot on the stove to clear up your sinuses. He said, no, not interested. But radon, just like you said, I want to reiterate to everyone too, there are things that won't burn. Like we have massive amount of radium underneath the ground. And when they bring the natural gas up that we burn at our homes, radon cannot burn out of it. It's a noble gas. It comes straight out into the air and does not burn. So when you turn your flame on, you're breathing radon in and you're absorbing it. So I really appreciated that part of your presentation, showing that there are things you cannot burn that will pass right through. And by the way, I've been 31 years in the air and water filtration and purification business too. So what Paul said and others, you can't filter these things out. Nanoparticles are so small, they pass right through the smallest and best of filters. It's like putting not a mask over your face to where, it's like putting saran wrap over your face and nose. You can't breathe out or in with it. It cannot stop these things. So that's the only way you could stop it is to cover completely, which you can't do on exhaust. So number one, I want to thank you guys for the presentation. This was phenomenal information. You made it real good for lay people. I'm not a really high-tech expert, but this information, like you said, demand answers. I cannot believe that they had the gall to do something where they said they would answer questions and they just refused to answer any of the tough ones. They'll answer the easy ones like what color are you going to paint the building or something like that, or what type of trees you're going to put around it, but they won't answer the questions that Paul and other experts come up with. Why? Because the answers won't go over very well with anybody, especially the media or anybody else. So thank you again. And I am going to make sure that Rob Bilott and others know that this is a potential PFS, PFOS issue, and maybe we can get you guys some more attention on it that way.
Thank you.
Hey, Craig. Craig, thank you very much. We appreciate that. There is no question that we have nothing to hide. We have no economic gain. We are residents, and we're just trying to protect what we have here. So appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and now unmute Thomas.
Hi,
I
Yes.
really appreciated your presentation. I want to thank everybody who spoke to the details. That was very well presented. It's obvious that you guys have done your homework and know what you're talking about. And what we see with programs like this or initiatives like this is that, as you were stating, they tend to pull the wool over the eyes of those in the area. I'm in Shenango. I'm not in Endicott, but I am running for Senate in your district. And I grew up learning about the watershed. And there's an old statement, what goes up must come down. And being in the watershed, our surrounding waterways actually feed New York City, New Jersey, Pennsylvania with their drinking water. I fail to see how these contaminants that you're talking about and the unknowns that you've discussed wouldn't affect those areas as well. I really can't believe this is happening. It seems insane, and you have my support.
Thank you.
Thomas, we appreciate that. John, any comments or Paul on anything you said?
No,
Okay.
no comments. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? I don't see any other hands up right now. Let me just scroll down through again.
If I may add something.
Absolutely.
I was born with an extremely rare genetic disorder called osteogenesis imperfecta. And interestingly enough, my mother grew up next to a chemical plant. The creek by her house would change color on a frequent basis. The company frequently paid to repaint the houses and the cars of the surrounding area in Bainbridge, New York. And I fail to see how there can't be a correlation. There's actually a higher rate of my condition in the area. It's still a low rate, but it's higher than average. You keep discussing through this a lot of unknowns. And I really appreciate the fact that you identify the fact that we don't know everything about this. Is there any research as to whether or not this would spread beyond Endicott, beyond the area? I mean, the groundwater is fluid, it flows. The air, we know that flows. Do you have any idea if this could affect a much broader area?
Well, certainly the nanoparticles can travel long distances. You know, they're so tiny, they don't go to Earth under gravitation. They move through down to Earth, Brownian motion, which means essentially they remain suspended for long periods of time. So on a windy day, they're going to be shifted all around Broome County, the southern tier. There's no limit. And you've got what is known as the hot particle theory. In other words, you're not going to be exposed, if you say live in Binghamton or Johnson City, you're not necessarily going to be exposed to a high concentration, but you might get one of these horrible little particles which lodge in your membrane, lodge in your brain, and then, you know, down the road, damage could be caused. And I don't think we should be playing Russian roulette with our brains and other tissues when we know that this is going to happen. I'm just flabbergasted that the DEC, I suggested to the DEC that what they ask SungEel to do is, well, what they do, the DEC should monitor the air, the ambient air in Endicott, perhaps elsewhere as well, but in Endicott, the main street, measure the ambient air for nanoparticles. And if the plant, heaven forbid the plant goes forward, but if it does, we would have baseline data. And if we see those nanoparticle levels going up in a few months, a few years, then it's quite clear that the incinerator is not capturing those, not destroying those, whatever. And that would be a good reason to shut down the plant. But the DEC would not do that because, as I said, their attitude is, if there's no regulation, there's no harm. And it's very similar to the absence of study means the absence of harm. And this is what we've got here. We don't have studies. So the regulators assume, well, there's no problem then. There's no problem. And I think you have to balance whatever the company tells you about the emissions that they collected in South Korea, very limited amount of data. You have to temper that with chemical extrapolation. You have to first of all, the DEC should have said, what is in these batteries? Where is the elemental analysis? What are the compounds? What are the elements? And so that they can address the emission data that they're getting from SungEel with this chemical understanding of what you would expect. But everything should be backed up with data. If you're claiming to be transparent, then you should be giving people data. And we're not even getting the most basic data. We don't have a photograph of the plant. They challenged our aerial photographs of the stack of the height. Okay, fine. Where's a picture of the plant then, so we can judge? Where are the pictures of the environment? Where's the analysis of what's in the batteries? What about your air emissions in South Korea? All this data is absent, invisible, and that just isn't unacceptable.
You know, I might add, if I may, it doesn't really make sense to accept data from the company that seeks to profit on what this is. Does the IRS ask you to audit yourself?
Right. Yeah, we actually talked to the DC about that. We said, you know, why don't you go to South Korea where they're doing the tests on the sister facility and, you know, make sure that, you know, they're actually collecting them from that stack and maybe not the local McDonald's or something. And the DC said, well, you know, we've got some challenges with that. And, you know, that would be really kind of hard. And the discussion I had yesterday with them, you know, they're not going to do it. You know, they went in the programs that I've worked in over the years with the DEC, they have a monitor out there full time when we're removing contaminated soil or when we're digging sediments from an aquatic, you know, channels, you know, things like that. There's always somebody there to make sure that you're doing things correctly according to a plan, but there's absolutely nobody. They haven't even been there, you know, and they're not going to watch them collect any samples. So we don't know. And then the answer is, well, there's a PE that's going to stamp that. And they know they have, you know, ethical standards they have to live by. They know that they could get in trouble. They could go to jail, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, yeah, well, we all know that, you know, and it's not like fraud never happens. It does. But their attitude is like, you know, this is the honor system. This is what we got. And that's that.
You know, and in our white paper.
Excuse me, we have quite a few more questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, that's okay. So Thomas, thanks for asking that.
Can I just add one thing to that? Because I think it's really important to understand. Even if they did the data, you're comparing apples and oranges. The building that is used in South Korea has a stack that's 500 feet high. And of course, what comes out of that is going to be different than what comes out of a 100-foot stack. And so we need to really understand that they're not exact comparisons. So even if the data were done, it wouldn't necessarily mean that our site is actually okay.
Well, actually, Howard, the DEC is now claiming, and MER also claimed, that the stack is actually 75 feet in South Korea.
Yeah,
that our aerial photographs are supposed to be of the plant next door. But this underlines the fact that, well, why don't you supply us with the photographs and all these details? I think the more relevant comparison with the South Korea, their site, their facility is an industrial zoned area, and the nearest residence is 3 miles away, not across the road, but 3 miles away.
And the winds go out to the ocean.
Right. Hey, there's a question that came up, and I have some that raised their hands, but one question is ground testing. Has any ground testing been done by anybody locally here? Because if there is an explosion and there are chemicals in the ground, how far can that take it? Can that take that explosion down to Main Street? There's problems down towards Jenny F. Snap School and McDonald's down that way historically. There was a lot of work done on Jenny F. Snap years ago, not that long ago, and they just rebuilt McDonald's. And there were delays because there were some issues of some contaminants in the ground. Any comments from our team on that? Any position?
Well, you know, it's you know, when you've got that much water and it's spreading around contaminants like that, you know, I said before, you know, it can get into the aquifer. I'm not really sure about the details, the geology and the water table. All those things would factor into it, as to what the subsurface really looks like. But certainly, the potential is there for these things to move into the groundwater. The groundwater moves towards the river, and so there are pathways where these things can move into. Depends a lot on what that geology looks like. I'm not really well versed on what the local geology is, but someone is. They did a lot of studies around the IBM Endicott area. There's probably data that we could be looking at that would give us some inkling into some ideas to what might happen there. But it's kind of hard to say. In the other
Okay.
thing, yeah, I guess
Okay.
that. Yeah.
And that's
Good.
the reason. That's the reason why they needed a full environmental impact statement, because that's
Yes.
the kind of thing that you would do.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So that was a great question. Hey, there's another question that was asked, because we mentioned it more than once tonight. The sessions this past Monday and Tuesday with SungEel, the closed one on Monday and a kind of open one on Tuesday.
Mhm.
Those presentations or those recordings, I believe, Ellen, are out on our NoBurnBroome site. Is that correct? And I think you posted it, right, in the chat?
The public meeting that SungEel provided on Tuesday, the 30th, this past Tuesday, that is recorded. Bill Houston was kind enough to share his recording of Monday's private meeting with community leaders. And I just put in the chat, I put the Tuesday one. I'll find the actually,
Okay.
Christine might have just posted it. I'll find the Monday one and also post it in the chat.
Okay, great. I'm going to unmute Maria. So Maria, you just need to click the button and you should be good.
So my question is about Huron. They're the ones that are going to benefit the most from this. They will be renting out a facility. They will have a tenant. They're probably going to get some of the money that's coming from the state. But as all of us that live in Endicott know, they are horrible landlords. They don't take care of their buildings. The trees along Clark Street are disgraceful. Is there any way to force some accountability from them? Obviously, we're not getting that from the village trustees. I was very disturbed when at one of the village meetings, Pat Dorner alluded to the fact that Huron seems to be running the village. So does anyone have any information on that?
Anybody from the team want to comment? Maria, it's a great question. Because Huron is got a lot of skin in the game here, right? They're trying to
could
get
add
tenants.
some information to that.
Okay, George.
I've been doing a lot of reading in the news. It appears as though Huron, owned by the Mains, is being dismantled by ownership and has gone into bankruptcy court. I don't know if it's for the purpose of restructuring, because that hasn't been mentioned at all. I do know that there's 3 or 4 lawsuits of some of the vendors for the meat that they were distributing to restaurants and whatnot throughout the nation, Northeast sector, and because they're not paying their bills in the millions. I believe Pat Dorner has some information to talk about that also. And actually, I found politically and the care of the village that they haven't been challenged to take better care of their buildings, yet they were given 2 tax bracket breaks in Endicott. And I do know that their last tax bill was $738,000, not in the multiple millions that they were when they were first here. But now it's been decreased considerably, along with a tax break to SungEel for $1 million, $1.75 million, almost $2 million tax break. I believe the 3/4, the 0.75, is slotted for maintenance So we're going to be paying with our tax dollars maintenance, $750,000 for the maintenance of their machinery. And they're only
I
renting
know
the
so many
building.
people whose land taxes are higher than their mortgages. That's ridiculous.
Yes.
Looks like Pat may have had something to
Yes.
add to that. Could you unmute him, Rob?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I didn't see it. He was unmuted.
Can you
Okay,
hear me?
here we go, Pat.
Okay, everybody, I had a 3.5-hour meeting with the manager of Huron on Monday morning. I was supposed to hear all this big news of why the mayor and switched her view on this project. I didn't hear anything at all in that regard, but I did understand, and I was told that the Mainses are the sole owners of the Huron campus. There's no longer the Matthewses or Orband or any of those people. The Huron campus was being dragged into the bankruptcy court with all their troubles, but it was kicked out because the Mainses took out a mortgage greater than the value of the property. So it was kicked back out because the stakeholders would have nothing really to grab onto. And it's really the problem of the mortgage company to try to recover those monies, which will probably never happen. So they did say they've got the taxes they're supposed to be paying today or tomorrow. They had monies for that, but their struggle is keeping tenants in the building. They're only going to be at 50% occupancy shortly because people are leaving. They had a company that was going to go into the second, third floor of the building on the corner of Oak Hill and Clark. But due to the COVID situation, the CEO thought the staying at home routine was beneficial to his company, so he canceled the lease. So they are just struggling like crazy, pretty much to get anybody in there. He kind of threw a fear factor at me saying that let's see what he said. If something happens to, if BAE would happen to leave the complex, the village is pretty much shot. And I just kind of listened because he also had a lot of other, he had 3 other opportunities of tenants that want to come in. He said they're not contingent on SungEel being shot down, but he pretty much did say there's a reputation out there trying to get anybody in the village in the industrial zone. It's a tough nut to crack, and they're being told they should go elsewhere. One of them is Amphenol. Amphenol wants to bring a project to the complex. He said their emissions for their electroplating process would be a lot more than this project. So they would probably be shot down by our group. There's another one that it's in the artificial intelligence business. They make connectors for some sort of mechanism. They're being enticed by the state of Georgia. They're going to offer this company $300 million to go to Georgia. New York State is offering $4 million. So the chances of getting that project is 0. And the big one, actually the most surprising one, is the I3 or I Imperium. I don't know. It's the
Imperium 3.
Imperium 3.
It's the one that's going to manufacture the battery, and it's questionable whether they're even going to come either. He said there's a process that they can go one way with or another. They haven't decided. They're being told by O'Brien and Gare, this large engineering firm, stay away from Endicott. Don't even come here. So they have to decide which way they're going to go with the process before they can even have the DEC or go to DC for a permit. So their stuff is up here in Endicott in storage. There's no activity whatsoever. And they do have a plant. One of the partners has opened a plant in Australia, which I found out through John from Binghamton. He mentioned that a while back on one of Bill's shows, which I was unaware of. One of the partners is a money man from Boston who hasn't come up with any money yet. So it's very questionable that those guys are coming to Endicott. So that was the surprising news. And it was really uplifting to spend 3.5 hours listening to something that just is more depressing than what this project is. So, so that's what I had from the manager of Huron campus.
Okay, well, thanks, Pat. So Maria, a lot under the covers there to your question. We're trying to uncover what's being discussed, whether it's in the paper or conversations like Pat just had. So, we're trying to keep our ears open, and pay attention to what's happened with Huron as well, and we'll continue to try to dig.
So I just wanted to say one thing. I would be more than willing to work with a group of citizens and the village to look at opportunities. I understand financially that we are competing across the country, but I also believe that we would be better served with attracting smaller businesses, startups. Big companies are always going to look for the big tax break, but I believe that if we work with smaller companies, 20 people that they're paying a fairly decent wage to and good working conditions. But I really don't like Huron painting a picture of the village because they aren't interested in the village. They're just interested in themselves. And that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. So for Ted, for Pat, there's some others on the line here that I think have interest in running for a trustee position potentially in the future. I would probably take Maria up on that and take note.
I meant work as a citizen, not running for office.
I didn't say running for office. I mean for the folks that are on here.
Yes.
You're offered to assist.
Yes.
Yeah, I understood what you were saying.
Okay.
Okay. So let's see here.
Hey, Rob.
George, did you have? Yes, Pat.
I think Lisa Lee had her hand up.
She does,
Oh.
but I think George did too. George, did you have something?
Yes. For Thomas, I wanted to answer your question that you asked earlier. What's the chances of pollution movement? I'm George Fiedler. I'm a retired registered nurse, critical care trauma pediatric specialist. I am a cancer survivor, and I had a younger brother that I took care of for 2.5 years that died from leukemia that a year later we discovered it was because of his exposure to benzene because he was a master carpenter. And his oncologist called me to tell me why he had an undifferentiated mutation in his bone marrow stem cells. I was diagnosed with cancer 6 months later. I was 35 at the time. My brother died when he was 29. So obviously, because I'm the type of person I am, I researched to the nth degree and continued even after retirement. And I help people now navigate through the FDA with clinical trials for old term compassionate use or extended care for treatments that have not been marketed yet, but show promise in second and third phase of a clinical trial, and help people navigate the paperwork with the FDA to bring stuff into America if it's from a different company, or just to get become part of a clinical trial, but not part of the statistics. Because when they're doing clinical trials, their statistics, they're pretty jealous of the numbers. And there are many companies that say, yes, you can use our drug. We'll teach your doctor how to use it, but you won't become part of the statistics to see if it will work, but still always communicate. In reference to movement, oddly enough, I actually lived most of my life on Long Island, which is a big, huge cancer cluster to begin with. But I lived in Endicott for 7 years. And I also lived in Florida for many, many years. And I lived in Scranton for 17. All of which, all areas been studied for a cancer cluster. And I helped with Aaron Brockovich in a cancer cluster that unfortunately killed one of my high school buddies from high school from kidney cancer. He lived on Long Island. We worked together in construction. And in the area of the acreage, there was an inordinate amount of pediatric brain cancers. So I worked with her for a while. I learned a lot of things about water movement underground and the contamination that they experienced from a current that was underground, because Florida floats on a big, huge island of lime, so it's very porous. And I learned there's an actual underground current there. And there's a thing that happened there was called percolation. Many factories were actually putting high pressure 1,500 foot lines to take their waste and forcing it into the ground to get rid of it beyond the water table. But what they didn't realize, from that pressure, there was percolation that caused water to rise, which dragged the chemicals up to the surface. That type of things can happen here because we are on the borderline of Pennsylvania, which big, huge coal areas of mining, several levels under the earth, and they have their issues. So movement underground of water, yes, contaminants can travel, be sucked up into our water treatment plants, can be raised or percolated up into our water tables and reservoirs. The other thing they were talking about was nanoparticles. Those particles are so light that they can evaporate from bodies of water. They can be disturbed by rain and carried up to the wind, and they can stay up in the clouds for a long period of time and wash down from the rain. So it doesn't make a difference of what a model shows that was portrayed to us from SungEel. The model shows that the wind is going to blow away from us. No consideration of a storm, a change in wind, a hurricane, the winds that cause tornadoes, and rainstorms, and inversion, where the land is cooling and the air is hot, or vice versa. It causes an oppression and it keeps something standardly still right overhead for hours and hours while you sleep. So anything that comes out of that chimney can be caught in the clouds for an entire day or two. So to answer your question, we don't want toxins even on a minuscule amount. I saw somebody write in chat, it looks like we are being approached to accept just a little tiny bit of pollution. Not going to hurt you. That's not true, because it is exponentially collective to stay. Because we have grass, we have dirt. Nanoparticles have different weights. They float on the surface. They can actually hover depending on their weight, midway in a body of water. And they can also be heavy enough to fall to the mud, where fish feed, where fish swim, where animals drink from. So that has to be taken into consideration when you're looking at a process like this. And
Thanks,
it's
George.
not only water vapor. Just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, I'm going to click on Heather right now. Heather, you'll see a message to go ahead and speak.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I don't live in Endicott. I live in Binghamton. My concern is if there were a fire, from the little bit of reading that I have done, excuse me, I understand that water is not the chemical, the item, the thing to use to put out a chemical fire. So I'm assuming, because I was married to a fireman, that foam is what is going to be needed. And if that is the case, is Endicott prepared to pay that kind of money to have that kind of a system necessary for something like this?
Yeah, so I think we could address that question. And Pat Dorner, I know you've had conversations with the fire chief about this. We thought the same thing, and the fire department, responded and said something like, yeah, well, water isn't really going to do the job. And then they said, well, we're just going to use a lot of water. So that's all. That's all more contaminated, stuff that's going to spread around and be uncontrolled and go all over the place. So, I mean, Pat, do you want to speak to that? I think you had that conversation. That's what
you have it quoted exactly what he said. We're going to use a lot of water. I'm not sure if they have a foam system. They may have, but I'm not quite sure of that. But when I heard what happens to the chemicals in a fire and you put water on it, it's not a good sight. And that was his answer to me, a lot of water. And I spread that information to some other attorneys and local big shots in town, in our area. And I said, this is all part of the seeker process that should have been looked at from the county, which was totally overlooked. And I think that's part of the reason why this recycle law is being rescinded on the 20th of July, if things work out all right.
Now,
Can I add-
SungEel, just to answer you, Heather, a little bit better, SungEel has two products that they had discussed during a meeting. One of them is called Cell Block, and it's a powder made of glass particulate material, powdered with other ingredients that are not listed because it's considered proprietary information because it's patented. And they had promised that their outfit both areas of the disconnected building for storage plus the facility, they're going to be outfitted with multiple devices that carry this product, that they want to be able to respond immediately rather than waiting for the fire department. So it is something that a fire department can get also. I don't know how the application they will apply it or whatnot. But from what I understand, they have had no orientation. They have not given a pamphlet. There are two of them out there by OSHA and also from the state and from another company that specializes in protection of employees for lithium-ion battery recycling plants, how they should dress, how will they respond to fires, how they respond to injury, how they document them. But nobody's been oriented. Not any of the fire departments in the area has received any orientation.
Well, that was my next thing I wanted to ask, is that you're also dealing with a very small fire department. So when you have to call for, a second, a third, a fourth degree
Yes.
Or alarm, I should say, where are you going to get these people from? And this is just going to be such an enormous cost for the village. I can't imagine that this would be something that the village would want to even look at. I mean, like I said, I live in Binghamton. I was married to the fire chief in Endicott, so I know a little bit about what I'm speaking about. I do think they do have foam. I'm not sure on the quantity of it, but
this, I think it goes back to what Pat was saying. They didn't have a appropriate seeker process, which involves, and I'm not an expert in this, but it involves telling the whole county, the whole area of what's going on, which would include contacting the emergency fire services, hospitals, etc. in Broome County. As you said, if there is a major problem, the Endicott will have to reach out to the rest of the county, but the rest of the county really hasn't discussed this. The village trustees, those who are for the project, have kept this tightly to themselves and restricted the normal processes. I mean, normally I've been told of an example of where you got this community feedback. I've forgotten what it's, something 219 or something. It's where you reach out to many different bodies, school boards and hospitals and so on, and you get all the information you can. This got this was done in a few days. They only got about 1 page of information. And then the village board had to make a decision on that. Whereas in other places, they had 35 pages of responses from different school boards, from other people that were sensed that they were going to be impacted by the facility, but not in this case.
I think I would add something else. If you had a fire and you had people respond, there's going to be contamination and they have to be treated medically afterwards. And it's not even clear that the hospitals, wards, or UHS are prepared for this. And if they are, they certainly weren't consulted with any kind of protocol.
I also would like to say something, that if there is an explosion inside of that place, there is not going to be, the people inside, all of the employees are going to be incinerated as well. So there's not going to be any time for anybody inside to go get any material to put out that fire/explosion, because we know they explode as well as causing fires, and that's a whole different ballgame.
There should have been a formal accident analysis.
Yes.
And in an accident analysis, you would say, well, what would happen if you had an explosion, blah, blah, blah. And you always do the worst case scenario. What if you had that explosion and the wind was blowing this way, to refer back to what Howard was saying? If you had the explosion when the wind is blowing this way, how many people would you kill? Or what is your evacuation plan for the kids playing on the baseball field? Nothing like that has been done. No formal accident analysis. To me, it's just incredible. It defies common sense.
But Paul, also, what about the people inside? What about the risk factor for those low-paying jobs? Think about, they all are people as well. They all have families, and they're working in a risk of fire/explosion, and that would be the end of them. There would be absolutely no time for them to respond, to call 911, to get the powder that supposedly there is. It would be an explosion, and that would be the end of them.
And if it wasn't an explosion, even if you had the acids eating through the pipework anywhere in that system, you could get large quantities of hydrogen fluoride, which would probably exceed what they call the threshold limiting values. And for that, you needed to get OSHA involved. OSHA deals with that. OSHA looks at those threshold limiting values. But nothing like that has happened. Nothing.
Can I make one more comment about that?
Yeah, then we have another question.
It's just a little comment about the legal process that happened when we were going through the 5-6 hour meeting back in May, when they were trying to ram this law through to change allow recycling in the industrial zone. This question that came up about fire protection, the mayor, as part of her plate to shove this through, had a 1-paragraph message from the fire chief, and it said, "We are more than capable of putting out a fire." Now that's the coordinated review that she thought was going to fly and make me comfortable in voting for acceptance of this law. And the 239 that went to the county, they did make like 8 recommendations, including emergency preparedness, what would happen if there was an explosion. But the 3 village trustees ignored every one of them and rammed this law through.
The mayor and 2 trustees.
So that was the legal process, which I've been told that if they do come back requesting another law, that an environmental impact statement will be required. Whether you're going to believe them or not, I don't believe them at all. So the fight.
Oops, sorry, Pat. So we have a question, and I'm sorry, Lisa. This is from Lisa Lee. Lisa, do you want to ask it yourself, or you want to give me a thumbs up, or I can read it for you if you like?
You know what? Let me unmute her.
Yeah, why don't you, thank you.
Yep. So Lisa, you have an option to.
It's up to you.
There you go. You're
Yeah.
live.
Sorry. So I had a question and a comment. The question was that maybe more of a comment too, that I understand that there are companies that won't, follow rules and regulations with regard to safety and health, using safety and health procedures, or, complying with those, or using equipment and technology like the scrubbers we were talking about. They don't always run the scrubbers because it costs too much. And people internally, the workers, don't always understand that technology and what it's for, and don't even realize when it's turned off what the negative impact could be. So, and a lot of times the companies won't turn things on or follow procedures until they receive a notice that they're going to have an audit. So how are we to ensure, what can we do to ensure that SungEel will follow all safety and health procedures, including running their scrubbers at all times? That's my first question.
Yeah, so, I'll just say that, one of the suggestions I had, I think in my question to SungEel, was to have a full-time DEC monitor present there to make sure that they're following, their standard operating procedures, et cetera. And as they would on, say, for example, an environmental remediation project, typically as I said earlier, they would have somebody there to monitor and make sure that things are being done correctly. That was a question that was not entertained by SMCC.
Oh, really?
Okay, so they didn't answer.
No.
Wow.
So no assurances there that they were going to comply with safety and health regulations.
No.
Okay.
Great question, Lisa.
And my other comment is just informational. When you were talking about the companies that may pull out of or not come into the Huron site, I had spoken to one of the owners of Imperium 3, and he indicated to me that the plan was for them to move forward. The battery manufacturer was going to come in and they're going to produce their batteries there. But because of COVID-19, they were, prevented from moving forward at that time. So as far as I know, their intention was still to come into that campus. So, and they have nothing to do with SungEel, and they are not receiving any materials from SungEel, is what I was told. And that's just from one of the owners and leaders of bringing that battery manufacturer into this campus. And I guess I just want to make sure we don't confuse the battery incinerator with a battery manufacturer, because
Right.
they're independent companies and they have nothing to do with each other. And SungEel saying that they were influencing the battery manufacturer to come in, I don't believe is true.
Yeah. Yeah, we're talking about a company that is about research and development for next generation technologies, and it's a huge difference from what SungEel's doing.
Right.
Right. So we do have a question.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Lisa. From Galaxy S9. I muted you again by accident. There you go.
I'm just wondering, I live on Milan Ave. We just moved here 3 years ago. And I'm just wondering why, we haven't, or have you heard from any of the local businesses, like Antonio's, the Battellini Bakery? Have they had anything to say about all this?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are a number of businesses that are definitely not for this. They have signed the petition. They have been very supportive in understanding more and supporting what we're doing here. Those specifically, I can't comment on. And there's others that are simply requesting more information because they are very concerned about this affecting their business, whether you're talking about from Antonio's up toward Oakson and beyond, or even across the tracks, right? So it's an important question. So there is concern from a lot of different businesses.
And she just disregards that, the mayor?
Well, let me tell you this. There are several, all the meetings over the last 2 to 3 months from the village were really well run by Anthony Bates and the way he ran the meeting. But the way the meeting flow went and the inability to really listen to really express your questions and were not well run. So no, as far as her really paying attention to the residents, the businesses, the real estate, the environment, no, not particularly.
So what are the next steps? Is that pertinent to this meeting or?
Well, that's a great question. There's a number of next steps going on right now. Does anybody on the team want to comment on that?
I will. So I'm Mary Ann Dorner, and we have a communications team / publicity that we're trying to get the word out. We're in the process of selling lawn signs that you may have seen all over Endicott. We have flyers that we're putting out. We are writing to Governor Como because basically this came from the top. We've written to Akshar, Lepardo, Garner. We're trying to get the word out to have more people come on board and join NoBurnBroome and help us kind of get more people on board. So yeah, we have a contact number on the website, contact info. You can actually put your name and someone will reach out to you if you want to help us.
Oh, okay.
I'll put the website, it has a lot of good info, so I'll put the website in the chat and so that you can have it.
Yeah, and we're also trying to alert all of the big entities around Endicott. Obviously, we have Union Endicott School District. We got a Catholic school, All Saints. We have 2 nursing homes in Endicott. We have 3 group homes that we know of. We have 2 preschools. We have Logan and the Northside Park, the pool. We have a lot of stores, restaurants right on Oak Hill. So we're really trying to alert those big entities, and none of them knew. I called all the CEOs of those and executive directors of those places. They did not know about this. The village has not publicized it. They've kept it under wraps. So that's what the communications team is doing. And then we have several other teams that are working in conjunction with NoBurnBroome.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're glad you asked the question. We have a phenomenal communications team, whether we're talking about what Mary Ann just mentioned, which there's a lot there, but it's just about awareness as well. So a lot of different social media venues. So again, thanks for the question.
Sure.
Rob, this is Ted. Could I make a comment?
Sure, Ted.
Yeah, my name's Ted Warner. I'm a trustee on the village board with Pat, and I was with Pat on Monday when we met with the manager of Huron. And we've never really known until Monday some of the facts about Huron. And so I just wanted, some of these things I jotted down is Huron is a separate corporation all by itself. It's not connected with the food businesses of the mains. So anything that happens with our food business will not affect Huron. And Huron is owned by the 2 brothers, the 2 Mains brothers. They're the only ones that are the owners that are left. They do have 2.865 million square feet of buildings to rent. That does not count the buildings east of McKinley. Those are not counted. Right now, they're 60% rented. When EIT leaves, they still have a few more things to move out, I guess, or something. They'll drop down to about 59 or 58% rented. I don't know how that stands with a developer to me, I would think they can probably do fairly good with 60% rented. Of course, they'd want to have more, but 59, 58% is probably good enough to pay the bills and make a profit. And then I did ask if for SungEel to come here and go into that building, is that a prerequisite to anything else he's working on as far as renting other buildings? And he said no. So if SungEel was to not go to that building, that would not hurt or affect any of the other tenants he's talking to. And then the last thing I wanted to say was I brought this idea up 4 times during the meeting, that what this whole thing, this whole 4 months worth of work has come down to the emissions coming out of the smokestacks. And my idea is, why don't we get OSHA, the DEC, the village with some hired consultants probably, SungEel, Huron, and Paul and John to represent NoBurnBroome. Get together in a meeting for a day, 2 days, whatever it takes, and negotiate out what the emission standards would be. And then that very night, when we had the meeting with SungEel for the community leaders, he said he is negotiating right now with DEC to have much stricter standards than DEC even wants. So if these groups, these 6 groups were to meet, it seems to me you could come up with some emission standards that everyone would be happy with. Probably nobody would get everything, but it's some emission standards that everyone would be happy with. Now, at PFAS is probably a totally different story, but right now it's just DEC and SungEel that are quote negotiating stricter standards. And so that's just what I wanted to say.
Yeah. Thank you, Ted.
I can add one thing if you want, Rob.
Sure.
We have legal representation. Of course, that's not inexpensive. So I would encourage anyone who's concerned to contribute to the legal funds. That can be found on the GoFundMe page. And I would also tell you that there is right now, presently, some legal action that hasn't been finalized yet. And that involves the Zoning Board of Appeals. And so there are things that we're doing. None of these things guarantee a result. And we have to hope that perhaps cooler heads and smarter people will ultimately be able to see that there's some serious mistake in this project.
Can I?
Yeah, and Howard, let me comment here about that as well. I mean, you talked about legal representation. I think we've done a pretty good job over the last 90 days in doing our research, trying to understand the position of the village, informing people on what we're learning, and hiring legal counsel. And it's been key. Our counsel has a background in environmental law, and we started a GoFundMe page, which was well received. We've been able to cover all of our costs so far. We have some additional that are coming up, like Howard mentioned. But I think we're doing all the right things to make sure that we're representing ourselves properly. We're utilizing a lawyer properly, and the GoFundMe was also just included in the chat. So consider it. The point of this call tonight wasn't about asking for money, but it is important to understand that we do need legal help, and we have it, and we think we're doing the right things.
Rob,
yes.
Rob, can I, Ellen, can you turn the volume up? Can I just add something to what Ted said? He said we should get together, DEC, EPA, etc., and come up with some tough standards. I just want to remind you of a slide. I don't know if Ted was watching a slide I used earlier. You need 3 things to protect the public. You do need strong regulations, but you also need adequate monitoring and you need aggressive enforcement. And if you don't have the monitoring in place, and we don't right now, and we don't have the enforcement based upon what else the DEC has not done, the public is not protected. And I've urged, and John joined me, when we spoke to the DEC, we had an hour's conversation with the DEC. We said, look, the Empire State Fund has earmarked $750,000 for monitoring this facility if it goes into operation in Endicott. We said, why not spend that some of that $750,000 in South Korea now? Do your measurements, do your experiments, do everything you need to do in South Korea. And when you've got your game sorted out in South Korea, you've got the data, you've got the emissions and so on, and you've proved to us that you can monitor it adequately, and we've argued strongly for the 4-week testing, which would include both dioxins and the PFASs. When you've got that, then we can talk about what could happen in Endicott. But we shouldn't be doing things in Endicott that they should be doing now and should have been doing for 10 years in South Korea.
Okay,
Thank you,
so
Paul. Appreciate that. Ellen, do we have a question?
yeah, so Maria has a question in chat, and then Heather has her hand raised as well. So Maria asks, has SungEel been issued a permit to operate while the zoning law is still in effect? And when the zoning law is rescinded, will SungEel be grandfathered in?
Ted or Howard?
Yeah, I can answer that for you. What happened was this plant was prohibited from moving into industrial zone district. So what the 3 people on the village board, Pat and I, voted against it. They voted to pass a law that would allow battery recycling companies in industrial zoning. One of the problems is it allows them everywhere in all the industrial zone districts of Endicott. So there was petitions, people went out and signed petitions. If you got 20% of the property owners around the border of these industrial districts, then you could stop the law.
Turn the volume off, just turn it off.
Okay, you could stop the law. So the law is not a current law. They're still counting those names. It's a complicated process to count all that. So the law is not a law. We're still under our old law. So what was going to happen was on July 20 is our next meeting. The petitions are supposed to be counted by then. So on July 20, we would vote to approve the count of whatever the count comes up to be. I'm pretty sure we did not have enough, or this group did not have enough petitions before the May 7 vote. So on July 20, we will vote to approve whatever that count was. The count will probably be that there was not enough petitions. So that means that night, this new law becomes valid. However, it doesn't become valid till it gets to Albany and they file it in Albany. So the last meeting I brought up, the problem is it's going to take 6 weeks to rescind the law. July 20 is 3. It's going to take 3 more weeks after that to rescind the law. So if that law becomes valid the next day after we vote on July 20, there's still 3 weeks before we can rescind the law and they can go in and get a permit, a building permit legally. So the village lawyer came up with an idea on this, I guess it was on the spot. He said, what we'll do on July 20, we'll vote to approve the petitions, which will make the law valid once we get it to Albany. We will also vote to rescind the law, rescind that same law, the same night. And so the next day, we will drive both those laws to Albany, file them at the same time, so there won't be any time gap where they can go get a building permit. So where does that leave us? Why would Linda want to rescind the law? So there we are sitting with our old law, which we have right now. So this 4 months of her trying to shove this law down our throats would be out the window. So then what's the next steps? one step is they could go and pass a whole new law. And but also this group could go out and get more petitions against this new law. The other possibility is SungEel could come in and get a building permit under the current law. The current law prohibits battery recyclers, but it does allow companies that are manufacturing companies. So SungEel could come in and claim they are a manufacturing company. It seems to me it's a very hard thing to prove. It would have to go to court probably, but that's a possibility. They could come in and say they are considered a manufacturing business, even though they're destroying things, they're not making things. And then it would be up to two lawyers to argue that in front of a judge, whether they are manufacturing or not. So that's kind of where we sit right now.
Yeah, one thing I would add to all that too, different kind of permit is the air pollution permit that they had suspended currently because of the PFAS issue. So they really are unable to operate anything until that issue is resolved. And as I pointed out, discussion yesterday with the DEC, they have SungEel, SMCC provided the DEC any plan to address that at this up to this point. So they cannot operate without that permit legally, so that's another really important consideration.
So in order for them to operate legally, they have to have both permits. They got to have the air permit from DEC, and they have to have the building permit from Endicott. So they could have a building permit, and all they could do is sit there and wait for the air permit, or they could get the DEC permit, and they still couldn't do anything until they get a building permit. So they need them. They need both of them.
Correct.
And I've been in touch, speaking of building permits, anybody can call the village and ask if a permit has been issued for an establishment. And I've been in touch with the fire marshal, and I continue to, and I asked the question. So know that we are paying attention, and we're not going to stop. Now, we have a question. Heather has been waiting. So Heather, I have unmuted you. There we go.
Okay, so this goes back to what Marianne was about, the communications part of it. I don't know if this helps you in any way, but none of these Zoom meetings are interpreted for the deaf. And I do know that there are at least two families that own property right here on the north side, 2 blocks away from St. Anthony's Church. They are property owners. I would bet that they don't even know that this is going in. It's not well advertised. And they're not interpreting these meetings for the deaf. That leads to also, they're most like, I mean, there are a lot of people on the north side here that English is not their first language. They still speak Italian, and they're not they're excluding such a huge group of people. So I don't know if that helps to the communications part of it. I mean, really, them not having these meetings interpreted for the deaf really is a violation of a federal law. It's the Americans with Disabilities Act. But I don't know, is it that they're not asking, but they wouldn't know to ask for an interpreter because these are not well publicized unless you go to the village's website. So I don't really have a question. I don't know if that helps you or not. Maybe this could all be over on a technicality because they just don't follow federal law either. I don't know.
You know, Heather, those are really good points that actually our team has talked about.
Yes.
Pat or Ted, do you guys have any comments on that right now, by chance? I mean, I know I'm putting you on the spot. If you don't, that's fine. But Heather, I took a note down, and I'm going to talk to our legal counsel about that. Yeah. But do you guys have any comments?
I don't know
Heather,
if it helps you or not, but Governor Cuomo was just recently sued by residents in the state of New York, deaf folks, because he refused to provide an interpreter for his daily COVID briefings. He refused, and he was sued, and they won.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting.
One of the things I found out from the organization for that actually upholds the federal law is that the village has to be requested to get one. And I did send a request to them and they still refuse to offer it.
Wow.
But I
So
don't know.
that can be reported right back, and you can. I was thinking of actually filling out a complaint form today for an investigation. Anybody,
Okay.
doesn't have to be anybody special. Anybody can go to the website and put in a complaint, and they will indeed follow it up.
So George, let's talk about that offline.
Yes.
You know, as a follow-up. Okay.
Yep.
Heather, I'm sorry, you're going to say something else?
No, just that I am a sign language interpreter. That's why I'm mentioning this.
Okay.
Southern Center might be a good resource for this, but if nobody deaf is requesting it, that might be a sticking point. You know what, George? You yourself are not a user of sign language, as far as I can tell. But if people don't know about it, how do they know to request an interpreter? Is really my point.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Of
Hey,
course.
Lisa, I'm going to unmute you. You have a question.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yep.
Another two questions. Number one was, we were talking about permits, and I thought I heard or read that Danish Mer stated that they spent a lot of money, was it $1 million or so, millions of dollars to renovate the building. How can they do that without a permit?
Had a permit.
They actually, when I talked to the fire marshal, it was Huron that did some renovation to the building, and he said that they actually did get a building permit, if that's what you're referring to.
Yeah.
And actually it wasn't required. It was Huron that requested it for their building.
Oh, okay.
I just talked to him last week.
Oh, okay. And then the second question I have is there a way that we, the village, could restrict in a different way this operation, in that perhaps restricting the trucks from coming over the village roads to bring in the batteries? So if they can't bring in the things that they're going to work with, the recycled batteries, they can't bring in the batteries over our roads, then they can't operate. Can we do anything like that?
I could say something about that, Rob. What the village should have done 6 months or 8 months or 10 months ago, they should have started holding meetings with the planning board, the zoning board, the village board, and they should. When this isn't just a normal company coming to town or that wants to come to town. This is something that everyone calls an incinerator. They don't call it that, but it's close to being an incinerator. And they should have had meetings and come up with safety standards, health regulations, emissions standards. They say they're going to only drive 2 trucks through town per day. That should have been a requirement in writing. All this stuff should be in writing. If they just say that, and the village board has for years said, "Oh, okay, that sounds great," it holds no water. They can start the very first day and bring in 5 trucks or 50 trucks. So there's been nothing prepared for this company. And so in 6 months or a year, when somebody wants to open one of these in Mississippi, they're going to call Endicott and they're going to say, "What advice can you give us about, you've got the first one that came in the United States." We're going to have to tell them none. We can't give you any advice. We didn't do anything. We've done nothing. Right. And Howard Warner is very correct. If you go over and look at that building where they're going to store these batteries, they're going to store thousands of pounds of batteries, and they're going to bring 1 day's worth of batteries across the street per day, only enough to burn for that 1 day. So this other storage building is nothing but aluminum siding. It's corrugated metal. It's not a building like they say is 2 feet thick walls. This is 2x4s and corrugated metal. You could hit it with a sledgehammer and knock the side off. This is where they're going to store all these things. And if you go online and look at one lithium battery catching on fire by accident and see how hard it is to put one battery out, you'd be shocked. And this building's going to be full of batteries.
Right. Okay. Ellen, did we have a couple other questions?
Yeah. Ted, while we have you, Kathy asks, what if the vote to rescind fails?
The vote was brought up by Linda herself. She spent 4 months trying to pass the law, and 2 weeks ago, she brings up the idea of rescinding the law. So who knows what she's up to? Obviously, there's some scheme here involved. I called it a cleverly crafted scheme that night. There's some reason why she would flip overnight and want to rescind the law that she just spent 3 months trying to pass. So it'll probably be a 5-0 vote in favor of rescinding the law. Now, if they decide to go and vote not to rescind it, now we got some problems. Now the fight starts all over again.